Right, here we are for another episode of the Speakeasier. Today we are talking to one of my favorite people in the industry. I met her many, many years ago, and we've kept in touch, and I've just been so amazed by the new venture, Creative Salon. We've got Sonoo Singh joining us today. Simone, what are you looking forward to about this conversation?
I think there's nothing that happens in the industry that Sonoo does not know. So I'm hoping she's going to share some secrets with us. Let's see.
Well, let's just cut to the chase and get Sanu on. We've got the brilliant Sanu Singh with us, who has created Creative Salon, and I'm sure we're going to hear all about that. Sanu is an amazing journalist and editor, lots of experience in media marketing. I don't think there's anyone in the industry who doesn't know you, Sanu. And you've got one of those names where everyone just knows you by first name. I think a bit like
Madonna.
Madonna. Whereas exactly, whereas sadly now there's another Assad that I know in the industry, so I've lost that. You've set amazing exclusives, interviews, high profile. You work with amazing businesses, agencies, and now you're running Creative Salon. So we're very excited to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Assad. Can I just say, huge honor. And I absolutely love the work you and the Unmistakable have been doing. I'm very proud of all the work that you guys are doing as well, and proud of what you've achieved. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, thanks for being here. Simone, why don't we just crack on and get straight into the grit of it?
Great to be here with you today, Sonoo. And this is something which we are putting to all of our guests on the Speakeasier. We often get asked about the origin story of the Unmistakable. And whilst that's a story that we've told in another place, we would love to ask you a bit about your origin story. So whether that's your beginnings into your career, or just however you want to respond to that, it would be great to hear.
Gosh, it's always difficult. Thanks for asking that question, Simone, because it's such a big question, always difficult to talk about yourself as well, because I always find it a bit pretentious. Also, I think I have a rather, I think, somewhat boring story. I think a lot of people who look like you and I, Assad, and have the names that we do, and are from ethnic minorities as well, there's always that tale of, oh, it was very hard to convince the parents for us to be let into the world of media because they had no understanding, because obviously the world of media, it's not a profession as such. I don't have any such story to tell, unfortunately. I as a daughter of very liberal Indian teachers, born brought up in India, I can't think of anything else, but and I never had that thing of being a doctor, a lawyer, neither did my parents have that, because my mother always used to say she's always easily led. And it's not that I'm not easily led. Still keep on challenging that. But that's because I think I have always checked my own biases and assumptions. And that's what I've been challenging. There's such an innate ability of most good journalists that I know. And I grew up with such fantastic mentors of mine in India, and started working very early. I think it must have been my first published story was when I was 8. I was very proud of that.
What was the story,
It
Sanu?
was it was I think it was about 100 words story. It was about, so again, colorism is such a big thing in India growing up, and especially in a Punjabi family. I'm the darkest in the family. So the fact that everyone else was so much lighter than me, it was always a thing. And then this Unilever owned brand, Fair and Lovely, which I think they've rebranded. It's not Fair, something and Lovely still. But anyway, it's to make your skin go lighter. But that was always my birthday present from my aunties and from my grandparents. Growing up with that, I think there was that thing of, let's start pushing as much as you possibly can. And then that was what the story was about. It was about how people look and behave differently. I was 8 at the time. I still have that, actually. A copy of that is still, I think, even if I say so myself, beautiful. But I started working with nationals, and I was primarily writing about culture, health, local politics, quite wide ranging. And I had an arranged marriage in 99, and I came to the UK because my husband is second generation Asian from here in 2000. I remember my in laws saying to me, "Are you going to be selling the Big Issue?" Because they knew that some publication thing I had, but that was the only thing that they could. I mean, nobody from that side of the family understands media, or essentially advertising. And my first break within 3 months came from Marketing Week. And I think they saw something in me. Stuart Smith, the editor at the time, saw. And I think there was this sense of, I've had lots of men actually kind of pick me up and boost me. Stuart Smith, the editor, Nigel Bogle, Sir Nigel Bogle now of the BBH, he was one of my mentors. It wasn't so much, and I've never thought of it like that either, because it wasn't any kind of savior syndrome. They weren't saving me from anything. I was too strong to be saved anyway. Slightly scary at the time, also. Not scared, but scary. I think the journalism, writing, being a journalist, also, as you can tell, loving the sound of my own voice. Elbows always out, communicating. I think that those things have always been such an important part of my upbringing, questioning, challenging. There's nothing better I could have done with my life than be a journalist. I don't know whether that answers the story of my origin. As I said, it's slightly boring, but that's
I don't think that's boring, Sonoo. I think everyone's got their story, and actually we know that people make so many assumptions, don't they, about what someone's story might be. I found it pretty inspiring to hear that, actually, and to know that you've still got that 100 words from when you were 8. I'm still collecting the 100 words that my daughter wrote when she was 8. She's now 13 and more writes to me in like acronyms. So, hey. Yeah. And I guess, how has that led you into founding Creative Salon? And I'd love to know where the name and concept of that came from.
The name itself, I have to give credit to my business partner, Claire Beale, the former global editor of Campaign. So we started out as each other's nemesis, really. I was Marketing Week. I was there for, I think, about 14, 15 years. She was at Campaign. And I think we used to hiss and growl at each other from the corners of any kind of industry dude. And we used to do this very performative nod to each other that, okay, I see you. It wasn't even an acknowledgement. And there was always this race as to who's doing better, who has more airtime on radio, who is beating the other in terms of the stories that we're doing. So it was very healthy, of course, but also we were each other's nemesis. She did ask me to work for her and to do maternity cover for the UK editor's role, which I did for a bit. And then we got to know each other, but we weren't friends. We were, I would say, friendly. And then when she was made redundant and I was at the drum, we started talking about it. Just so transpired that we hit it off because we started talking about people that we love, we admire, we respect. But I think we really bonded on the people that we can't stand.
That's the best way to bond.
That really cemented our friendship, I think, that we hate the same people. So it was a great.
We won't ask for any disclosures
No,
here,
no,
Sonoo.
no, absolutely not. No, not even on a deathbed, I don't think. But that really did bring us together. And then there were lots of people, and it was during COVID, between several lockdowns, and we knew the same people, surrounded by the same people. And she said, let's do something together. And we both truly love not just being journalists, we love advertising. And it goes for most of us. It goes for both of you, I imagine. Certainly no, it goes for you, Asad. We are not of the industry. We didn't know anybody.
Oh, yes, Simone's not of the industry.
Exactly. And Claire and I we know, because that's how it transpired, that we've been made by the industry. The industry has made who we are. So we're very grateful for that. And for the people around us, it's really empowered both of us. So the idea was also to give something back at some point as well. And the one thing we really love is doing this, being with people, acting ideas, being inspired. Like I said, you have some beliefs, but you're checked, or you're checking your own beliefs because you're listening to other people and you are collecting all this intel. This industry is full of such fascinating folks and fascinating personalities. And she said, there's a name I really want to use for my business, and that's Creative Salon. And I was like, oh my God, Creative Salon works perfectly. You are Claire, I'm Sonoo, CS. I mean, yes. And so there was obviously clearly something on the card somewhere above, some energies bringing us together. And the whole
Cosmos. Been talking about the cosmos.
Yes,
Isn't it?
cosmos, karma, whatever you want to call it. Absolutely. The thing really also was the fact that as two women obviously of certain age and experience and all of that as well, to start a business which is very male dominated or had been very male dominated for a very long time. And harking back to the 16, 17 Parisian salons, where women who did not have the agency but were at the center of salons, they were the ones who were getting the most enlightened, the most fascinating, the most inspiring people together around a table, which is exactly what we do at the salon. And the other thing that we really wanted to do was really make sure that in some way, shape, or form, we help the new diverse talent, the young talent, upcoming talent. So we said right from the word go that a minimum of 10% of our profits would go into organizations that are doing good for any kind of initiative. So we have collaboration with the Brixton Finishing School. Our platform is totally ungated, which means that for a lot of young people working in advertising or wanting to come into advertising, who don't have access to campaign and not paying for campaign drum ad week, they can come to our site and learn more about the industry.
Yeah, it's amazing to see the growth and the scale that it's had so quickly. I think there's so many people who send articles around or say to us, "Have you seen what Creative Salon is doing?" And then actually, when we met and you told me about what happens behind the scenes and the
Yeah.
meetings that you, it just seems so excellent at a time when people aren't maybe connecting as they were before. And as you said, through lockdowns, everyone got a bit disconnected and you're bringing people together. And I wanted to know, Sonoo, you said you love advertising and you've written about culture since the age of 8. What are the conversations that you're hearing about advertising's role in culture right now? Because, the mainstream trade press, I think, is talking about AI and the decline and
Yes.
what's happening. But I'm really curious for what is that conversation at the salon?
It's interesting because obviously, and we talk to the leadership teams of agencies, but also the client community, the brands as well, also. And within these kind of collections of people, everyone recognizes the power of content to influence culture, the power of advertising to influence culture, social norms. I suppose the question perhaps is whether the content is progressive enough to be creative content. Because I look at my 17-year-old who pays premium to buy into most things, which allows him to skip advertising.
This is it. Simone, that's what you say.
And
Yeah.
and I find that fascinating because he's not living in a bubble either. It's not that he has no sense or brands don't have a resonance at all. He's very brand savvy, as most kids his age are. So that's not to say that something isn't working. I think it's this thing that we have as brands, as agencies. Where do we find the aperture to find those new stories, fresh narrative? Where is it that those conversations are taking place? When, and I'm going back obviously a few years, when things like Dove Real Beauty, This Girl Can, they quite rightly ushered in almost an era of both, again, marketers and agencies trying to do the right thing, ensuring there's enough diversity, there are authentic voices, there is a representation, and that became part of the culture. But I think now the ways of doing it is so different, and how brands or how kids, especially, how they exercise their brand preference. Like Simone, you said you're 13, is it 13 you said?
Yeah.
Year old has similar things. So if brands, agencies as well, were to understand that your ads are going to be ignored, you are going to be avoided, but you create work that works within those limitations to do what they must do. I think if that were the starting point always, that's quite exciting. And then you can play into culture. Because sometimes, there's lots of, it's like this whole LGBTQI conversation. It's brands want to be seen to be doing the right thing. So they keep on trying to insert themselves in. Because inclusive advertising has become like the tick box thing. So you could
Ooh.
almost argue that's sort of almost capitalism in action, isn't it? Because that's an attempt to appeal to another demographic. But where is the authenticity? Where is the permission? you talk about Madonna. I mean, when we talk about culture, there's Madonna, there's Banksy. Where is all of that happening? I think those are some very interesting conversations. And for, like you talked about art own trade media, I think as an industry, oh my God, we're so obsessed about self-flagellation. And there's no other industry that criticizes itself as much as we do, but still not getting those things
Get,
right and not doing
yeah,
more cultural conversations. It's mind-boggling sometimes.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you think the breakthrough is? Because I agree with you, Sonoo, and I think it's the authenticity. When I hear the brands that resonate with my daughter, it's word of mouth. It's what someone that she respects on TikTok has said about a particular brand. It is definitely not what a corporate machine is trying to sell via any route, even if it's comedy or it's clever. It's just like there's almost an apathy when she's engaging with that. So what do you think that breakthrough is?
I think what I said before, trying to work within the limitations that we're surrounded by, and then almost understanding what is it that we are trying to do, and playing, whether it is brand marketing, performance marketing, all of those things. It's just, I don't know why, it's just popped into my head. When Daniel Craig did that ad for Belvedere, do you
yeah,
remember the James Bond films had just finished, and so he wasn't James Bond anymore, but doing that kind of dancing thing where he's shedding that baggage of being James Bond, because that was anything but almost an antithesis of James Bond itself. And I think making us almost question what to expect from men. I know it's a very tiny, tiny example within this conversation, but I think that kind of, whether it is a cultural moment or the cultural moment, I think we need to decide what exactly. And of course, the Tesco Ramadan work that you did with BBH, that billboard, I think that was the most potent thing I've ever seen, where it is not just for a community, but opening the eyes of a larger population, where it's not that you need to participate in that festival, but to be able to then therefore respect what's happening during the day where Muslims are not eating and then waiting for Sanda. I think all those things, it was such a beautiful representation of that.
but I think what's happening. So there are a couple of things on my mind just hearing you speak. Is when I speak to insights teams, a lot of the time it's what does this community think? What do they think? How do we reach them? And actually, sometimes there's just a universal truth that can be grounded and then they apply differently to different people. But it's almost like we've got too focused on the identity group. We've
Yeah.
got too focused on what does this individual audience think. And the interesting thing hearing you talk about the Tesco work was there were two jump off points available. One jump off point is let's educate everyone around Ramadan. The other jump off point is let's help Muslims really feel seen and represented. Now, you have to then prioritize which one you're going to do, because if you're doing an education campaign, you take it down a different route. Whereas we went down the let's make sure Muslims are behind the camera, informing this, shaping it. And it became art because we felt like we were creating something and then naturally it played out, which I don't know how much of the machine of marketing does anymore of creating art.
So true. And I also think that art only happens because the way you've described it, there was intent and purpose behind it. I so believe that brilliant storytelling is seldom magic, because it isn't. It is magical, but not magic, because it
Yeah.
has to be intentional. And your Ramadan campaign, because it also, I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago, I think we just started Creative Salon, and it prompted a series that we do on Creative Salon called Creative Salon Loves. And it's not a weekly, it's not a monthly series. Every now and then, a piece of work that really hits one of us when we like can't stop talking about it. And that person has to then therefore write about it. And it was a Royal Navy film featuring a Sikh boy and his journey to be in the Royal Navy. And it was at the time what was Engine had created it. And the most beautiful, I was in tears. I mean, my husband was bawling his eyes out. And the beautiful, the magical thing about it was they did not see identity as a problem. That wasn't
Yeah.
the starting point, and that's what made it work so beautifully.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder about the link between diversity, inclusion, creativity, and commercial success. Because I'm sure the agency and brand leaders that you're talking to are wondering about some of that of, do I focus on D&I? Does it take us away from this? What's your view on that?
I don't think anyone is questioning it at all. Our salon suppers are very private affairs, and we are able to ask some very provocative questions. And it's a very animated discussion, to say it very politely. Also, this is one of the things, because I don't think it's a secret anymore, that obviously not only does it drive creative excellence, but it's good for the bottom line as well. I think the challenge really is that everyone is scared of asking the question, how do we get it right? There are certain things which are easier to do. You obviously try promoting more people, try including people from a certain background, hence BBH and Tesco working with you guys, as said. But I really do think these conversations are happening, but some of the uncomfortable truths, like you said, maybe if we were to sitting in a pub, maybe some of those uncomfortable truths would come out a bit more. I think we're not having the uncomfortable conversations around DEI. Some very easy ones but things which really get to action-based strategic comms, I don't think are happening. Also, I don't think it is helpful to point fingers, to blame or shame. I don't think that's the way forward. And I think you and I have spoken about this. That's not helpful at all. What I am seeing is a sense of overwhelm. God, sometimes even I'm fatigued, because obviously a lot of times people who look like you and I are sometimes asked the questions. Now, we don't have the answers. Also, someone like me, I come from a place of privilege, so I need to understand that myself. But I think it's the education piece. It's really understanding the barriers. I finished reading Salman Rushdie's essays, and he made the point about how the British did not fully understand their own history because so much of it happened overseas. And that was a big problem. And I think that probably is true of all of us now, as Londoners, as an industry, as a nation. We all from different parts of the world, and we all kind of sort of coming together. But how do we reduce the incomprehension by finding the stories that connect us all? I think that is
Yeah.
a bigger question. And within the DEI, I was talking to Etta Davies, who now at Dentsu Creative, and we were having some of these conversations. And one of the things I think a lot of us feel is the education piece, because what we do know, and I said this to you earlier, that a lot of brown people in our industry always have a story to tell that, oh, my father really wanted me to be an accountant or scientist or doctor or whatever. And they were so disillusioned when I went into advertising. Now I'm CMO and or whatever that might be. What we are not tackling is that because advertising is not a profession, you don't need qualifications to get into advertising. How do you go to certain communities and talk about the economic power of the business that is advertising, the business that is marketing? How do we talk to those communities who see some very set routes for their children as to how advertising and marketing can be part of that mix? We are not doing any of that. And that really, I think, sits heavy with me, because all we're saying is, oh, we don't have enough people. Yes, we don't have enough people for a reason. But sometimes the lack of understanding and the biases that sit within certain communities, those land quite heavy. And we need to go through those weeds and say, okay, look, we are just as welcoming of you as of other communities.
I guess just thinking about the broader talent question in general,
Mm.
because young people are really diversifying their interests just generally, regardless of what community they might identify with. What do you think the creative industry needs to do to re-energize young people into the profession?
Do you mean people who are already in the business of advertising marketing?
I mean, young people who are considering their career options, what routes they might take?
I did this stint at Richmond University teaching MA about advertising and marketing. Gosh, loved it. I think in another life, I'm going to be a teacher because that energy, like you said, that you get from young people when you are being provoked and being challenged, and you have that knot in your stomach where you do know that there are these 5 students, or one of those 5 students out of a class or whatever. I think I had a cohort of 60 is going to get up and ask you, and invariably you will not know the answer to that. And you will have to read more, you will have to talk to a few people more. Oh my God, I cannot even tell you that adrenaline, how exciting that is. I absolutely loved it. In another life, that's what I'm going to be. But anyway, that wasn't your question. I think, like I said before, we need to talk about our industry more. We need to be talking at secondary school levels. I used to be a school governor for a local primary school, and I remember career days. And then there was always a doctor, a nurse, a dentist, a bus driver, and sometimes a fireman. There was nothing else. And I went to other schools and asked. It was invariably that. There was nobody else. And in a way, you could argue that a lot of that is shift work as well. So it is easier to get them in during the school and talk to children, inspire them. But we need, it's not just at college level, but we need to be not just talking to the students, we need to be part of communities. We need to be talking to their parents as well, try to shift some of the perceptions that they might have, that it's not just going to the pub, it's not just about snooker tables. There is a seriousness to this business. There is how this business impacts the economy as a whole. We are just not telling that story. We are just not saying how exciting and how indeed there's sexy and playfulness, but there's a creative muscle which you're not employing at most other places. This really, you get paid to be creative.
But I think something that's always sat with me is at the crux of it, advertising is selling.
Yes.
And that's what we need to be talking about.
Yes.
You're there to sell more things. That is the brief.
Yes.
Often the selling can be very top of funnel. It's about brand and it's not direct action. And I wonder if people really feel a bit ashamed of that. Sometimes when I talk to people, I just feel like there's an embarrassment or an unease about that core of selling.
You're so right. I think we've always been, as an industry, we've been apologetic almost. That's the core, that's the crux of what we do as a business, as much as it is like we've talked about playing in the culture and trying to form opinions or change biases, all of those things. But yes, it is about selling. And this is such a general statement and might be pillared by some as well. But, selling this idea to the Indian community who understand what selling is all about.
Yeah.
Really?
This is do you know, like, the reason why I was smiling, Sanu, I'll tell the story. When I worked in a big agency, there was one of those like cake fundraising things where everyone brings in a cake and you have to they raise money for a charity. And I laugh now because a friend of mine is actually thinking about organizing a cake sale or something for work. And everyone's asking about allergens and allergies and is it okay and how are we going to do that? But it wasn't like that back in my day.
No.
Just brought any cake. But I just sat there when I have no idea what I'm doing here. I don't know how to bake. So I just grabbed one of those tea canisters and became the chaiwala. So I followed the the cake tray as it went round the floors, and I said, "For an extra 50p, you could have a cup of tea."
Perfect.
Because and it was that little, but I just saw the level of unease in people going, "Can we say chaiwala? Like, is he able to play with it?" But it is that sense of like Indian communities. When you go to India, like the brute capitalism you
Yes.
have to have where 20 people are selling all the same thing on the
Yes.
beach and you have to pick which one you want to go to.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe if we just like that, you'd get more Indian people in.
Oh my God. I mean, all my uncles and aunts would be so much happier if they knew that what their kid was doing, being bored as a bloody dentist sat somewhere, was actually selling, making things which was helping sell stuff. They would be all in. They'll say, okay, come on, why are you not? You're not
Yeah.
for advertising.
And
So true.
in those roundtables that you're having or in the salon suppers that you're having, obviously AI is on everyone's minds of what's it going to do and what jobs is it going to take and production budgets, et cetera, et cetera. What are you hearing, Sanu, around AI and creativity and commerciality?
I think it's obviously all very true about some kind of transformation of lives. More or less, obviously, people are still meandering their way through understanding. Let's not forget, what was it? Was it this week or last week? 25 years of Google, and search was obviously aided by some form of AI. What we're talking is a different form of AI, which is generative AI. Obviously, I'm no expert on AI, but what I'm hearing is, of course, it will take out all the grunt work and it will take care of the efficiencies, all of that. I think what the questions probably that we are not asking, perhaps I need to be asking, more journalists need to be asking, is it'll be the businesses or corporations with the right resources and therefore the leaders therein who will thrive, because they will become much more powerful because they'll be able to get the tools. Because obviously, the best AI will be aided by the vast amounts of data, tremendous computing powers. And I also believe people, skilled, technical AI brains of people. But I think even more fundamental to that question is whether AI could reshape the inequities that already exist in the system. And I am talking also in the context of what social media has done to all of us, and especially our children, because I've always thought that the story of internet, that's what we used to call it when we started. We are doing the internet, but the story of the internet is the story of men pouring huge, huge amounts of money into platforms they didn't really understand. And look, where are we now? And as much as AI as a piece of technology is going to, as I said, take some of the drudgery work, and of course it will reshape the cityscape because of the cars that we'll have, and healthcare will be reshaped. But are we paying enough attention to not just the potential benefits, but also the risks that come with that as well? And the other thing which I find quite fascinating, because again, as I said, I'm not really an expert, but as human beings, we have discovered, explored, interpreted the world through the make of the brains that we have. And my question is now, does that mean we've reached the limits of our cognitive abilities and we're willing to give machines all those powers? I don't know. That
Yeah. Do you use G Suite, Sanu, or Google, like the Google Workspace? I don't know, Gmail or
female,
whatever. Like,
yes, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So
That's my
Ryan and I were
technical
just
question.
yeah. So Google Workspace now has this thing called Duet AI, where you can link up AI into your Google Suite, and we use that in the different. So we were just looking at some of the features that it offers. One of the things is you can, if there's a thread of emails, you can just say, summarize this conversation for me.
Wow.
Or if there's a new spreadsheet, you can say, create me a agenda for a full day workshop, and it will do that for you. And what that's striking me, if I was running a traditional agency today, I'd be thinking, let's go and look at all the work that an account assistant, account executive, and account manager does. And let's think about how we can free all of that up using AI so that those people who are young can be thinking and be free, because that's where the ideas can come from. But instead, what we do is we put people on the pathway because people have risen up the pathway in their way to go, well, back in my day, that's what I did.
Yes.
So they've got to do that.
Yeah.
And so we were thinking about it in that context and saying, okay, acknowledge the risk constraints behind this totally. But let's also look at what the opportunity is here for what it can do for human cognition.
Absolutely.
I think that would be really exciting for us.
Yeah.
But I don't
It's
know.
exciting. It's exciting when it's about augmentation, and that requires the right kind of leadership, doesn't it?
Yes.
And I think that's the risk that we're all nervous about, is have we got the leaders in the world to really want to augment rather than replace,
Yes.
or just think about efficiency?
Yeah, I think if it comes to let AI and its impact just happen in isolation, which is what you're saying, that's the scary bit, isn't it? But it's like sort of looking at journalism and journalists. For instance, news is so commoditized. I'm talking across the board, not just trade. So the second you push the button and say exclusive breaking news, it literally takes seconds for other outlets, your rivals, to be then peddling the same kind of news. And no one outside in the world who's actually consuming that content really understands or even cares where point of origin was, because it doesn't really serve any purpose. So that, I would imagine, AI would take command over that, control over that. That's an easy thing to say. This person has moved jobs, been fired, this account has moved, this person been cancelled. All of those things the AI can take care of. But like I was probably being, or I am being a tad pessimistic. But I like your way of thinking that if we were to take all that drudgery away, then how do we inject, almost empower our people to have more of those cognitive abilities to therefore think?
I'd be so curious at one of your salon suppers to actually challenge the leaders to shake their own bias, which is that whole notion of, well, I had to do that at that level and therefore, and that continual almost oppression that can happen.
I seriously do not think that's the case right now.
Okay.
And the reason I'm also saying is there has been a huge change, as especially in the advertising industry. So there's in terms of leadership, I'm saying this, and the leaders also realize that not only because they're under scrutiny, but they have been thrust into this slightly, not slightly, rapidly shifting conditions as well. They do know that they have to be everything, everywhere, all at once. They have to be a good leader. They have to have empathy and purpose, growth mindset, all of that. But there's no silver bullet as well. So what you're saying, I don't think rings true. And it's same of the clients as well. There is a richness of thinking from what I am seeing and hearing as well, because they all know that some of the behaviors, like you are saying, they are being put to test, have been put to test, and some of them obviously they know have failed. So there is quite a new, almost exciting template of leadership, I think, is happening. The reverse is slightly more concerning to me, that the leadership is having to shake off all the trappings of what it was, or that's how I did it, or that's how my leaders did it. And therefore, that's being shaken quite a bit. So leadership is changing. I think what I fear isn't happening enough of is the workplace behaviors. How is the employees, how are they acting? And I think that level of responsibility, level of resilience, all of those are seen as dirty conversations to be happening. So the equation has changed so much. There's some very interesting shifts nonetheless. But I seriously do think leaders are not just questioning themselves, but the system itself as well, which is very exciting.
Yeah. But we've covered a lot. Sanu, what's still stuck in my head is who are all the people that were on the list that you and Claire put together, but that's one for another time. I guess let's just think about where we go next. What's on your mind in terms of messages you would leave to those leaders at the minute? Given you hear from so many of them, what do you think they need to hear from you right now?
Gosh, what do they need to hear from me, from us? I just think the listening piece is the most important at the moment, as much as I am also of the view that, and it's not a very popular view at all, that not all stories are important. And the reason I say is not because not all stories are interesting. As human beings, we are not interested in everybody's stories because they're not interesting. So everyone having the same share of voice, I think that is a pipe dream. But I do think even within that context, even within that thinking I have, listening is still quite important. And it's fundamentally has helped me as a journalist to break stories when I started, as a reporter, breaking stories, making sure you are listening and listening hard, and then running to the loo, scribbling on toilet paper, putting it into your pockets with the hope that not only is it legible the next day, but that you haven't either peed on it next or spilled your drink on it. Um, but
Wow, what a metaphor to leave people with, Sonoo.
but listening, I can't, you cannot underestimate how important listening is, because again, I think that's where I started, checking your own biases and checking your own beliefs and challenging your own assumptions. I think there can be no greater strength, whether you're a leader or otherwise.
As we're going into the weekend, You've talked a lot about the listening that you do, the challenging yourself, asking some very big existential questions. What's downtime going to look like for you?
Oh, sleep and more sleep and eating. Is that what you're asking me?
That works.
And reading. I'm just finishing The Love Marriage. I started yesterday. I'm almost done, so I think I'll finish it because I picked it up straight after one of my favorite authors, Julian Barnes. I was rereading Love, etc., because I was going to go and see him speak at the South Bank, which was amazing. But Love, etc., is about three people getting married, getting divorced, getting remarried. But it takes the most boring aspects of people's lives and makes it so interesting because it's just so witty, so humorous, so relatable. Just
Amazing.
yeah, just
Amazing.
yeah.
So one question we ask to round off, Sonoo, so we ask this often in interviews, which I've told is apparently quite a hard question, but so I'm just going to prime you with it. What, Sonoo, would you say makes you unmistakable?
Apart from my name, which is Madonna, you've already said.
We'll have it. Yeah.
Yes, there's lots more but yes, I think I'll stick to that.
Sonoo, thank you so much for spending time with us, and just thank you so much for everything you've done by way of the support you've given me, the unmistakable, but also just to give your time so generously to us right now. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I don't know about you, Sonoo, but I'm going to go to the toilet now and write it all down on the blue roll.
Oh, yeah, it's been brilliant to get your insights. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you,
Thanks.
thanks. Thank you, Asa. Thank you, Simone. That was absolutely wonderful, delightful. Thanks.
That was a fantastic conversation. I think Sonoo has very much left a mark on the Speakeasier, and we should all be checking the toilets for what's now being on the loo roll. What did you take away from that, Simone? What stuck out for you?
It really left me thinking about, as she said so clearly, the questions that we're not getting to. And actually, are we in the shallow end of this conversation, which feels much easier to have? And how do we collectively get into the deep end? Because everybody's sitting with that anxiety, that fear, and it's going to take collective consciousness to get some resolves and answers. So I'm left thinking about how we do that.
Yeah, and I think that's the journalist's trait, right? The ability to dig deeper and keep going and ask what's really going on.
Mhm.
And I think that's what that conversation has left me with, which is how deep can we go? What will that then result in? So, yeah, I just feel so hopeful off the back of that. I feel like I'm just coming
Yeah.
off anything's possible.
Yeah. And I want to read The Love Marriage.
There you go. That's our recommendation for today on the Unmistakable Book Club. Thank you for listening. Follow us at _ the Unmistakable on all the socials. And that's been another episode of the Speakeasier.